Smoke and fire swallowed the compound, turning the Texas sky into a dark, churning storm. The smell of burning wood and flesh clung to the air. From the outside, reporters and cameramen jostled for position, their lenses capturing what would become one of the most infamous moments in American history. Government agents, battered and weary, shouted over the chaos, their radios crackling with orders. Inside the inferno, the screams of the dying faded beneath the roar of the flames. 51 days had led to this. 51 days of waiting, of praying, of believing that salvation would come. It did, but not in the way they expected. When David Koresh spoke, people listened. He carried himself like a prophet, unraveling the mysteries of the Bible as though God himself whispered them into his ear. Those who followed him, men, women, and children, believed he was the chosen one, the Lamb of God who would open the 7 seals and usher in the end of days. The world will come against us, he warned, standing at the front of the chapel, his voice steady and sure. But we are the faithful, and we will be ready. Mount Carmel, the sprawling compound on the outskirts of Waco, Texas, became home to the Branch Davidians, a religious sect that had existed long before Koresh arrived. But under his leadership, it transformed into something else entirely. The outside world saw them as a cult. Inside, they saw themselves as soldiers of truth. Weapons were stockpiled in the name of protection, and young girls became Koresh's wives under the guise of divine prophecy. Outsiders who questioned too much found themselves pushed to the margins, and insiders feared questioning David at all. "But why do we need so many guns?" one follower asked, as he stacked crates in a storage room. "Because they'll come for us," another replied, eyes dark with conviction. "And when they do, we'll fight." For years, whispers of abuse and illegal arms dealings trickled out of Mount Carmel. The government was listening, and soon they came knocking. February 28, 1993. The fact that the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives, or ATF, had been watching the Branch Davidians came as no surprise. After all, it was their job to enforce some of the very firearms laws they suspected the Branch Davidians of breaking. Koresh knew that they had suspicions about what all was going on in Mount Carmel, and that it was only a matter of time before they wanted answers. So he had to prepare himself and his members to fight back when they did. But no one could have been prepared for what happened the day they actually showed up. They had been watching, planning, but what should have been a controlled operation exploded into chaos the moment the first shot rang out. To this day, no one knows who fired first. Gunfire shattered the morning stillness. Windows exploded as bullets tore through them, sending shards of glass raining onto the floor. Inside, men scrambled for their rifles while women screamed and shielded their children. Outside, the agents were met with a wall of bullets. Some dove behind vehicles, using them as cover. Others weren't so lucky. Blood pooled on the dirt, turning the dust to mud beneath their bodies. The ATF had come expecting resistance, but they had underestimated the firepower inside. "We've got hostiles," an agent shouted into his radio, pressing a hand to a wound in his side. Another agent, his vest riddled with holes, collapsed behind an overturned truck, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Truck hoods became makeshift stretchers as wounded agents were dragged to safety. Some clung to consciousness, their hands slick with blood. Others stared blankly at the sky, their final moments slipping away. Meanwhile, the media had arrived in full force. Reporters in bulletproof vests stood at a safe distance, their cameras rolling as gunfire echoed across the plains. Helicopters hovered above, broadcasting the unfolding nightmare to the world. The public watched in real time as what was supposed to be a swift operation turned into an all-out war. After hours of gunfire, the ceasefire was called. 4 ATF agents and 6 Branch Davidians were dead. The rest were trapped inside. And so, the siege began. For nearly 2 months, Mount Carmel stood at the center of a standoff unlike any the country had seen before. Federal agents surrounded the compound, their vehicles forming an unbreakable perimeter. Negotiators pleaded over loudspeakers, their voices carrying through the cold night air. An agent called out over the speaker system that had been set up around Mount Carmel, "Come out peacefully, no one else has to die." Inside, Koresh's voice carried just as strong. "We are God's warriors. This is his test." Despite being surrounded by a fortress of officers on a 24-hour rotation, life continued in a twisted way inside Mount Carmel. Children played in the hallways, unaware that their world was on the verge of collapse. Some of the women wavered, wanting to leave but fearing the consequences and refusing to leave their children behind. They kept up with whatever chore they had been assigned, like tending to the wounded or preparing whatever rationed foods they had remaining at the compound. Night after night, they attempted to sleep through the deafening sounds of loud music, audio recordings of animals being killed, alarms, and the bright flashing lights the agents played in an attempt to drive the members out. Outside, tempers flared among the agents. They were exhausted, frustrated, and itching to end the standoff by any means necessary. All negotiations had failed, and whenever agents thought they had finally made some kind of progress with Koresh, he would change his mind and continue to refuse to come out peacefully. But the tension snapped on April 19th. Army tanks tore through the front of the building, and tear gas canisters were fired inside, their thick clouds seeping through cracks in the walls. Screams erupted inside as the gas burned lungs and blinded eyes. Agents took their opportunity to converge on the compound, trying to gain entry and force the Branch Davidians out. Then, the fire started. No one knows how, and the agents and Branch Davidians pointed fingers at each other, both swearing the other had been the aggressor. Maybe it was the gas igniting. Maybe it was Koresh and his followers, unwilling to surrender, setting the building ablaze. Either way, the inferno spread like a beast unleashed. Outside, agents stood frozen as flames engulfed the building. Some shouted for fire suppression teams, knowing that there were children inside. Others watched in grim silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on them. A reporter's camera caught the moment. An agent, arms crossed, watching the compound burn with a smirk. Not all of them were horrified. The people inside of that building were responsible for the deaths of their friends and fellow agents. Those people had kept these officers stuck out in the middle of nowhere, torn away from their families, for over a month. They deserved whatever was coming to them. Inside, the heat was unbearable. Fire licked at the walls, turning escape routes into death traps. Mothers clutched their children, sobbing as the smoke stole their breath. Some ran, searching for any way out, but the exits were swallowed by flames. A desperate few managed to break through a collapsed wall. They stumbled into the open air, choking on smoke, their skin blistered from the heat. Behind them, the compound crumbled. 76 people, including 25 children, died that day. David Koresh was one of them. The fire smoldered for days. The ruins of Mount Carmel became a graveyard, the twisted remnants of lives lost. Investigations followed, but answers were scarce. Did the government push too hard? Did Koresh and his followers set their own fate in flames? Was it all avoidable? The debates continue to this day. For those who survived, the nightmares never ended. Some struggled to reconcile what they had believed with what they had witnessed. Others vanished into obscurity, their lives forever marked by the flames of Waco. And for the rest of the world, it was a stark reminder. Sometimes, the battle for truth consumes everything in its path, leaving only ashes behind.